All right, everybody, and welcome back to the House of Wisdom in the great city of Baghdad, a place of scientific, mathematic, and medical discovery. Discoveries that will shape much of our modern world. All right, today's lecture is a very, very, very condensed presentation talking a little bit about the Prophet Muhammad, some common elements of his life story, and we're going to briefly look at an important concept in Islam called Sunnah. Sunnah means kind of the way or example, and the idea is that actions and deeds performed by the Prophet Muhammad are always like a perfect role model for us to act and behave in the world. Many the examples of Sunnah are often found in a collection of books in Islam called the Hadith. The Hadiths are complicated. There's many books called the Hadiths, some which Muslims say are authentic, some that Muslims say are not authentic, some say that Muslims are like, eh. Um, all right, let's get started here as we journey and learn just a little bit about the life of the Prophet Muhammad. And with this lecture today on the life of the Prophet Muhammad, we will also, this will give you some background for the discussion. And what's kind of interesting, we're actually gonna watch a film called The Message that never shows images of the Prophet Muhammad, but somehow gives us a sense of the world that maybe the Prophet Muhammad may have lived in. I'm going to ask you to tell me how, kind of your thoughts about it in the discussion board. The world again is set in 6th century, 6th, 7th century Arabia, where the we have a tribal society that different tribes are housing their gods in this structure called the Kaaba, the cube. And this is in what city? Was that? Yes, Mecca. Good job. Um, and we know that this structure, there's a group called the Quraysh. The Quraysh have a monopoly over this structure, and as having a monopoly over this structure in the city of Mecca, the Quraysh are getting very rich and very powerful. But there's an individual who is going into seclusion, seeing the city as a place of corruption, being kind of appalled at some of the religious practices like sacrifices, these different gods and goddesses that are housed in the Kaaba. In seclusion, we're gonna start to learn a little bit about the life of an individual, Muhammad ibn Abdullah. Well, how do we know about Muhammad? It's kind of a hard answer. There's not a lot of historical sources. Much of what we know about the Prophet Muhammad is written quite a bit after his actual death. Most sources are written 7th to 8th century CE or later. And then we also have a collection of stories about the prophet called the Hadith. But there are debates over whether or not which texts are authentic or not. The earliest biography was written around the 8th century by Ibn Ishaq and later revised and updated by Ibn Hashim. The prophet will die in 632 too, so over 100 years have passed since we start seeing this. We do have non-Muslim writings about the Prophet Muhammad. There's some indications about him on coins and on inscriptions. But here are just some general things. Around 570 CE is the birth. And he was part of a clan called the Hashemites. And this clan belongs to the most powerful tribe, the Quraysh. But he's orphaned at a young age, leaving him in a very vulnerable position. He will develop a reputation for honesty and was often known as Al-Amin, the faithful one. He's disillusioned with life in Mecca, with its indulgences and its corruption. And during the month of Ramadan, this is actually very important. So Ramadan is the name of a month. We also learned from last time that Ramadan is one of the months where tribes would not enact vendettas, or enact vendettas. At least they're not supposed to. During the month of Ramadan, he encounters the first verse of the Quran via the angel Gabriel. He would tell this to his wife, Khadija, who's a very important woman who really protects him, funds him, and she'll actually become the first Muslim convert. So the revelation is in Mount Hira, where the Prophet Muhammad will encounter the angel Gabriel. And he'll begin a 22-year prophetic career after, 610 to 632. Speaking of the oneness of God, God is merciful and just, the importance of worship as a way of showing gratitude to this God, submission as peace, and basically a sense of unity among different religions, but an emphasis that Muhammad is the final prophet, that there is a justice and a final justice. This final justice, those who are part of one universal community of believers, the Ummah, they will receive the final justice is likely to go good for them. And then there will be a final day of judgments. And above all, not above all, very important in terms of his interactions with Quraysh, is that the Kaaba belongs to one true God. Any other gods or goddesses, any other images or statues that are in there, they've got to go. And this is what will get him in trouble with the Quraysh. So responses to Muhammad. It looks like those who are poor and disenfranchised, who are former slaves, would react very favorably. The Meccan establishment, so this is the Quraysh, the tribe that runs Mecca, not so happy, especially those who are going to lose money. They're going to see that this message will pose a threat to the established social, political, and economic order in Arabia. His clan is originally punished. However, the Prophet Muhammad had a very powerful uncle, Abu Talib, and he basically warned people, do not kill my nephew or you're going to have to deal with me. But they did not kill the Prophet Muhammad because of the protection of his uncle, but his clan did undergo an economic boycott. So two individuals were really powerful, really important in the life of Prophet Muhammad. His wife, Khadija, very rich, wealthy woman, very successful. And then his uncle, Abu Talib. Many of his followers, however, the protection would not extend to them, especially if they were orphans or didn't have really any place in this tribal society. They were often openly persecuted. So that's kind of what's going on in the city of Mecca, to the point where the Prophet's followers will have to leave. They'll have to head to a city called Yathrib. Yathrib will later become called the city of the Prophet, Medina. So the Hijra was in 622. The Prophet and his followers, they migrate from Mecca to Medina. This is considered year one of the Islamic calendar. Those who left Mecca are known as the Muhajirun, the immigrants. And this is many a mark of important relevance. This is an important moment in the history of Islam, because this was a symboling of a group. This is the first community of Muslims. This is the birth of the Ummah. You have a community who are choosing good over evil, evil being the way of life in Mecca. This is choosing God's will over human ambition. The human ambition is what the tribal leaders in Mecca are up to. And it becomes a paradigm. So, it kind of an example of how modern Muslims who lose their homeland. An example in Pakistan, many Pakistanis who left India during the division of the country and saw themselves as going on a hijra. They're going to a place that would be more, where Muslims would have more freedom to be Muslim. All right, in Medina, the Prophet Muhammad will establish a constitution that some say is the basis of a first Islamic state. These will be the laws and moral principles of the Ummah. And Muslims, Christians, and Jews are portrayed as a group that's a unified society. God and his prophet is the ultimate source of authority. But there were challenges. This group had sparse economic means of survival. They were viewed as a political threat by those in other cities, especially Mecca. And in the tensions with Mecca, the Mecca and Medina would face off against each other eventually as the two major regional powers going into battle. So some of the major battles. 624 is the first major victory of the Ummah during a raid of a Meccan caravan. 627, the successfully defend Medina from Meccan forces. This same year, the Muslims win key victories over Jewish tribes who had sided with Mecca. And in 630, the Prophet Muhammad returns and will capture Mecca, unifying Arabia under Islam. In particular, the Prophet Muhammad will reclaim the Kaaba as the house of the one true God. So I do want to talk a little bit. So we the first week's modules were a lot about stereotypes. And one of the stereotypes is associating Islam with violence. Well, virtually every single religion has had warfare in their history at some point. I think that's important to know. But what I want to do is take a look at some verses from the Quran about religion and war. Religion and war, this is one of the verses. Permission to fight is given to those against whom war is made because they are wrong. Surely God is able to help him, who are expelled from their home for no cause, except that they say, our Lord is God. So the verse is often read here, and you can pause and kind of look at it yourself and take your own, and I encourage you to pause it and look through it on your own. The verse here is often viewed as kind of saying that war is okay in self-defense, that to defend oneself, this is a necessity. And it goes here, this one, fighting is ordained for you, though you hate it, but you may hate a thing that is good for you and love a thing that is bad for you. It is God who knows, not you. So here the indication is that those who are going to war, they don't love war. They don't love violence. This is just something in fact, they hate it. But this is something that has to be done for a greater good. And we can think about other religions where we have war. This is, every single religion has traditions of warfare. All right, so this is the Prophet Muhammad in short, some of the major events of his life. But Islam at the death of Muhammad, 632, an important year. This is the farewell pilgrimage. This is where the Prophet Muhammad makes his final pilgrimage to Mecca and then shows everyone how to do the pilgrimage. Muhammad will successfully introduce Islam in Arabia and unify virtually all tribes as Muslims behind one God. He'll radically transform the existing tribal-based social, religious, and political order of Arabia. And he introduces this idea of the Ummah as believers of a community of believers of one true God, the revelations of the Quran, and the final day of judgment. These all become the new ideal for structuring all aspects of life. The Sunnah, this is an important word, the example of the Prophet becomes the model for living as a Muslim in the world. and Medina becomes the model of an ideal state. And in the discussion boards, you'll be asked to talk a little bit more about, compare this notion of the ideals of the Ummah versus what was there before, the tribal humanistic world. And once again, the Kaaba is transformed into the sacred center of the Muslim world in the eyes of Muslims. This becomes once again restored as the house of the one true God. Okay, well, that is going to wrap up this very short crash course on the Prophet Muhammad. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well, and as always, stay tuned.